On this video, I talk about the considerations for choosing your deadlift accessory lifts. Selwyn here from winstrength.com. Thanks for tuning in to the fourth video of the How to Improve Your Deadlift series. The first video we talked about breathing and bracing. Second video we talked about the technical aspects of the deadlift. Video 3 we discussed programming considerations for the deadlift. And on today's video we're going to talk about accessory lifts and how to pick accessory movements to help improve your deadlift. If you want to catch those previous 3 videos, make sure to check out the playlist, which I'll leave a link for right here. That way you can catch up and stay up to date with this series. So following on from episode 3 where we talk about programming considerations and how to implement that second deadlift session a week, today we're going to talk about what you should actually implement in that second deadlift session. Because yes, to start off with, you should just really do the same deadlift variant that you like to do 2 times in a row. We just want to play with sets and reps that we're doing. One's heavy and one's light. That way you get more technical exposure to lift, and you really want to focus on honing in on that technique on that second deadlift or that lighter deadlift session where the weight's not as heavy and you have more reps to practice the deadlift. I think it's a great time to focus on technique when the weight isn't as light, when the weight isn't as heavy. So today we're going to talk about accessory lifts and how I personally go about choosing them. There's really 2 factors that I like to think about when choosing my own accessory lifts. The first of those factors is being how it's going to affect my overall stress for the training block, for the training cycle over the course of the week and over the course of the month. This is because when we add in that second block, we're exposing the body to obviously extra stress that we want our bodies to be able to recover from. So with that in mind, we need to keep in mind the overall structure of the program so that we're not exposing the body to too much too soon. Just like I wouldn't recommend that second deadlift being a second 1 rep max day. You shouldn't do 2 days of just 1 rep max training and 1 rep max training unless you're like preparing for competition. Because there are really going to be 2 types of accessory lifts. One that gives you a mechanical advantage for the lift, and the other one is going to give you a mechanical disadvantage for the lift. An example of a mechanically advantaged deadlift accessory is the block pull. Basically, we are shortening that range of motion. So we're putting the deadlift on some blocks and pulling it up. So instead of starting, say, mid-shin, it might start just below the knee or just above the knee. Where you pick that height is going to depend on where your weakness is for that pull. But because we've shortened that range of motion, we're able to pull more weight than we can deadlifting from the floor, obviously, because we've decreased the amount of space that we're moving that weight. So with that in mind, you can either pick up more weight or you can pick the same weight up for more reps. And that's just going to mean that we're exposing the body to more overall stress because that tonnage and that intensity is going to be higher than compared with the conventional deadlift. So when we pick that type of movement, we have to choose if we either want to increase the volume on that, so do we want to rep out the same weight a lot more times, or do we want to increase the intensity, so we want to dial back those reps and increase that weight. And however you choose that is going to be up to you, because we have mechanically advantaged the lift there, which means we're able to stress the body to a higher degree than we can otherwise. The other type of lifts are mechanically disadvantaged lifts, and these are my more favorite type of lifts, and that's because we're adding difficulty to the lift, which means that we can use lighter weights, but the lift still feels difficult. So take, for example, the complete opposite of a block pull would be a deficit deadlift. So instead of decreasing the range of motion, now we're actually starting to increase the range of motion by, instead of raising the deadlift bar, we're now going to raise ourselves by stepping onto a platform or a 45-pound plate. You can check out a video that I made about the deadlift, the deficit deadlift, which I'll link to right here, and then I'll go into more depth of one of my favorite accessory movements for the deadlift. But it's an example of a mechanically disadvantaged accessory lift because the movement is now harder to do, so we'll feel it as being more difficult, but the stress from the weight won't be as high because we can't lift as much weight as we can on a regular deadlift off the floor. So now with that mechanically disadvantaged lift, I prefer to do those. We can pay a little bit less attention to the overall stress of that week because we're now just inherently reducing the amount of stress the body can incur because the movement is harder than if it was a conventional deadlift. We're always comparing the accessory to the regular. When the lift is harder, we use less weight, but the movement still feels difficult. If you do a pause deadlift, that's still going to feel really hard, even if you use a significantly less amount of weight than you can with a conventional deadlift. So we're able to address a couple of things there. We can still attack both volume and or intensity with these mechanically disadvantaged lifts and not have to worry too much about the overall stress load on the body. The second factor I like to consider when choosing accessory lifts is that they should address your weaknesses. Generally, when you deadlift, over time, you're gonna start figuring out your strong points and your weak points. Are you strong off the floor, the middle part of the pull, or the finish of the pull? And generally, when you train the deadlift normally, your strong points are just only ever gonna get stronger, but your weak points are gonna lag behind that, and there's gonna be a tendency for that gap to slowly increase. As your deadlift increases, your weak points won't progress at the same rate as your strong points will. So you'll find that you don't really need to train your strengths a lot more than you do. You really need to dive in and attack those weaknesses in order to bring up that deadlift, because you're only as strong as your weakest member. So if you're really weak off the floor, no matter how strong you get with a block pull, if you can't ever pull a weight off the floor, you're not going to get to that point of the knee where you'll really be able to shine. So you're going to have to focus more on bringing that weakness up rather than bringing your strengths up. But you're only really going to find your strengths and weaknesses after you've been training for a while. That's why I like to recommend for people just getting started, and if you're still in that late novice stage, is to continually do the same deadlift pattern over and over again, because not only will it teach you the technique, but it'll also start to highlight where your weaknesses are, and you'll be able to sort of see this on video footage, or just thinking about where you're pulling and where it's hardest, thinking about where you find the most difficulty in the lift. And when you find that most difficulty in the lift, that's when you're going to be able to pick your accessory movements. So if you're weak off the floor, things like pause deadlift, deficit deadlifts that I mentioned earlier will help with that. Even getting into some more advanced techniques like accommodating resistance, so you can add some chains or bands. That way you really need to train that explosiveness off of the floor. If you're weak at lockout, then block pulls are going to be a solution to that. So we have different tools for different weaknesses that you can use in order to address that deadlift. Okay, so that'll wrap up my quick considerations video for choosing your deadlift accessory lifts. If you have any questions below, leave them in the comment section below. If not, let me know what your favorite deadlift accessory movement is in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the playlist. I'll leave a link right here. That way you can catch up on the previous videos and make sure you don't miss out on that fifth and final video for the deadlift. This has been Selwyn from Wynn, and remember, a better life through strength.